Welcome. Hey, I'm Brad Green. I run the Angular project at Google. I'm excited you guys could join us. We're all pretty excited on the Angular team. Tonight, we're announcing, and we're not good at ceremony, so we're just kind of announcing, we're calling Angular2 in alpha, meaning there's some bits out there on GitHub, and we'll show you later how to get to them. But there's some bits that you can go play with. And tonight, David East of the Firebase team is going to come and show us the fantastic to-do MVC app done in Angular2. The presentation is maybe only about 20 minutes. We will be up here, Mishko and Igor and Naomi and some other folks on the team will be taking questions that you might have about Angular2, and we'll skirt issues when you ask us about the timeline. But you can ask us real questions about Angular2, and we can really answer them because things are fairly real now. So as always, when you ask questions, we're going to have you sign a form that says it's okay to release them to YouTube. So please only ask stuff that you want to have on live stream. We're excited to be here tonight. I'll have David come up and we'll get going. David, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Oh, okay. Thanks.
How's everyone doing? Is this good? All right, tell me, this kind of like gets away from me at times, and then I'll like talk over here and you can't hear me at all, so just keep me in check. All right, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys here tonight. I think we have a little bit of an interesting topic that you might want to hear about. So we're going to be talking about Angular2. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan. I'm a developer program engineer at Google where I work on Firebase. I actually only work on Angular part-time, where I work on the developer experience, which is essentially like creating great documentation, code samples, and all the things that are going to make all of your lives hopefully a lot easier. So this time around, if you have any problems with the documentation, you know who to throw things at. So I've actually only been working on Angular2 for about a month now. So I kind of find it kind of surreal and crazy that within a month time frame of saying, like, sure, I can help, that here I am talking to you all about something that's in an alpha stage. So for the past month, I've just been bugging the core team with all these questions while they've been coding away like crazy. And just sort of every day I get a fresh new copy of Angular2 and make new stuff with it. So this presentation is sort of like what I've been able to pull away from that. So like always in something in alpha, this is a disclaimer. It's kind of like what you see at the bottom of the email when someone says, like, don't talk about this if you received it or something. Angular2 is a work in progress. Things might/will, probably definitely will change. So everything you see in here, like, don't hold me accountable if you see this later and you built an app on this. I'm sorry. All right, before we get talking about a lot of the concepts of Angular2, I want to talk about the motivation. Like, why are we building Angular2? What are the things that are different? And what we're looking to address. And then once that's done, we're going to talk about concepts, like all the new stuff in Angular2 that's really cool, the building blocks and all that. And like Brad said, it's only about 20 minutes, so there's not enough time for me to cover everything. There is a lot more than what's on here. But if I went more, it would be just like total mind blown. Like, how do I learn all these things? So we're just going to focus on the very basics. And after that, I'm going to show the to-do app I created, which is also very simple. And that's up on GitHub, so you guys will be able to check it out afterwards, too. All right, so motivation behind Angular 1. Well, it's an aging framework. It dates back all the way to 2009. So a lot of things in 2009 didn't really exist. So right now we are looking into the Shadow DOM and ES6 modules and ES6 in general. And that wasn't really around then. So Angular kind of created its own things that helped out there. So now with Angular2, we don't need things like transclusion anymore because that's what the Shadow DOM does. It provides that for us natively. And then also with ES6 modules, they replace Angular modules. Like, Angular wants to be able to sit on top of web standards. It's not the point of creating a web standard or creating a standard of your own and then using that. We want to play nice as the web evolves. Another thing is performance. So speed is obviously very important. And I have a quote from Mishko, which was, I'm quoting him from tomorrow. And it's, he said, today Angular2 is 5 times faster than Angular 1. So after that, hopefully it will be faster. But tomorrow, it is 5 times faster. And if you don't believe me, I have a chart to prove it, because charts mean it's legitimate. So to the very right over here, or I guess my left, your right, we have Angular 1. And so this is a deep tree benchmark, which I should mention. So this is essentially represents a very complex Angular application, like very deep-rooted nested components, which we'll talk about what components are, but just think about very heavily nested DOM, which essentially makes up an application. So that's all the way out here to the left. And this is with Angular 1. And this is how fast Angular 1 is with that. And then this is the baseline. And this is a fixed cost. So this is essentially it's hard-coded way of building this type of application. So it's going to be really fast because everything's hard-coded. You would never do this in real life, but this is how we can say, OK, this is as fast, this is like a bottom level of speed. And then this over here is Angular2 with 2 different types of optimizations, or I guess with 1 optimization and 1 not optimized. So Angular2, obviously lower in this case, is better. And Angular2 without a view cache, which is essentially without a way of being smart about how we're managing our views, is 3 times slower than the baseline. And the Angular2 with the view cache, which is being smart about keeping around our elements, is only 1.4 times slower than the baseline. And as you can see, this is very, very close. And this is just today or tomorrow, as Mishko told me. Another thing is the simple cognitive model. So a lot of the when you're first learning Angular, it has a lot of concepts. And each one of these concepts has its own learning curve. You could spend an entire day learning about all the different things of a controller, and you could start learning about all the different things that you can use transclusion and directives for. So this is just a list of all the concepts that we first start learning out in Angular 1. And what's kind of funny about this slide, too, is there's actually more, and the screen clipped the rest off. So we kind of start out learning these things, and these are all like great concepts. And once we learn them, you kind of feel like an advanced Angular user, and you know well how to use your controller. You know the difference between factory service provider, and you're able to have all this flexibility. Well, with Angular, we want to provide this flexibility, or with Angular 2, we want to provide this flexibility for you guys, but maybe do away with a lot of these conceptual models and still have the same power and flexibility as before. So later, I'm going to show you how we take away some of these concepts. So the motivation is web standards. We want to sit on top of web standards, not create our own, and performance, so being as fast as possible while still introducing less concepts for you guys to learn about. So a lot of you have seen Angular 2, but for those who haven't, this is sort of your not-so-first, maybe kind of first look at Angular 2. And I'll just let it sink in for a second. You guys kind of take a look at it. Yeah. All right, now before we say what this actually does, let's talk about the syntax, because that's important. What's happening? Some of you might be looking at this saying, like, is this the Dart version? Is this Java? Is Gwt back? I'm not really sure what's happening. So trust me, Gwt's not back. This is @script. And @script is really not too much. It provides syntactical sugar for metadata annotations, which is this @ sign right here. That @ component, that's @script. If you wonder what @script stands for, it's literally just @script, @script. So nothing too special. So something to know about @script is it's not here to replace JavaScript. It's not the intention. It's merely syntactical sugar on top of ES6. It also does types, but we're not even talking about types because it's not required with @script. Another cool thing about @script is the Angular team is working with TypeScript, V8, and a bunch of other people to get this actually worked into a proposal for the TC39 committee. So like putting this towards the future of JavaScript. Another thing about @script is you may say, like, that's cool and all, but I really don't want to write any of this new stuff. Well, @script compiles the ES5. So you can still write all the JavaScript code that you know today. It's not required at all. And like I said, types are completely optional as well. All right, so back to the component. So we're going to focus on what this actually does now that we know that TypeScript's not scary, syntactical sugar on top of ES6. So we have this whole thing is called a component. And a component is how we structure and reason about our UI. An entire Angular application is just a tree of components. And as you can see, we have the first part of the component, which is the metadata annotation @component. And this describes what our component is. So we have the selector, which is the actual HTML tag that will be this component. And then we have the template, which, excuse the template config. This is some of the stuff that you'll see changing. And then within there is the URL, so where my template actually lives. So within this component annotation, I can say simply, all right, This is the selector. This is where my component, this is where my template lives. There's a lot more that can be done here, but this is pretty much the bare minimum you can get going for creating a component. And the second part is the class. Now a class, this is not @script, this is ES6. And within the class we call this the component controller. So you have a component, and you have a component controller, or component annotation and a component controller. The component annotation, like I said, tells you everything about how your component gets wired up. The controller is what your template reads from. So how we used to attach things to scope or use controller as syntax, we don't have to attach any of these things anymore. It just automatically happens. The templates are self-reading from this component controller. So within a template, I can say to-dos, and I know that it's my component's to-dos, and it's the two items. So I could say to-dos.length, and I could bind to that. So one more time and all together, we have component annotation, and we have a component controller. And together, this makes one component. So those are the two parts. So now we understand briefly how we create components. It's two simple steps. But we need to understand how do we get this on the page, because that's the end goal of all of web development, is get something to appear on the page. So the current bootstrapping process, Angular 1, we have angular.module, and we specify our app name. Then we have to wire up ng-app and specify that also with the app name. And then we create a controller, attach things to scope. And then we have to say the ng-controller. And you can do ng-view, but this is just one of the simpler ways of getting it set up, and specify the template. And this is roughly 6 steps. You have, like we said, create module, ng-app, create controller, attach items to scope, declare controller, create template. And each one of these things is probably only 1 to 2 lines of code each, but they're very dependent on each other. If you misspell the app name, it blows up. If you forget ng-app, you kind of refresh the page over and over again, asking yourself, like, why is this happening? And then you realize you forgot the directive. In Angular 2, this is a lot more simple. This essentially is your bootstrapping process. We already know how we create component. So @component, and then we can say export class component, which essentially means like give this out to the world. This is ES6 syntax as well. And then down here we have more ES6 syntax where we bootstrap. So we import Bootstrap from Angular, because Bootstrap is a function provided by Angular. So it's a manual bootstrapping process. And then we import the to-do app that we exported out from here. And then we say bootstrap this to-do app. And that essentially is your process. The only thing that I have sneakily not included is the template. So you'll need a template, which is url/todos.html, but we're going to get into template syntax in just a second. So there's one little piece that I didn't mention, though, and that is the ES6 to @script compilation. If you're using ES6 or @script, that's not going to run in any modern browser right now, so you'll have to use your favorite ES6 compiler. Tracer works very well with @script, has experimental options that allow you to specify that. And it actually works in the browser, which the To-Do MVC app uses no CLI. It all works in browser. And right now, you have to use system.js to import these modules as sort of a module loading shim. But right now, we're working on sort of a key turn solution where you don't have to worry about the crazy ES6 module loading world. So we saw the 6 steps before, but now it's just 4. And hopefully, number 4 goes away one day, because it's just the bridge to writing the code we want to write for tomorrow. So we create a component, give it a template, bootstrap. And sadly transpile until that goes away. And if you write ES5 code, you don't have to transpile at all. So it's a much more simple model for getting started with your Angular app. All right, so we've talked about creating a component and how we get it to appear on a page. But now we have new template syntax. So now I threw a lot of new code at you again. So I'm going to give you a little second to let this sink in. Where we're creating the component, the code block below is its template. All right, so now that I think you guys have looked at it a little bit, we have this template right here, and essentially this component is called name change. All it does is it just changes the name. We type into a text box, we click enter, and then that updates. And as you can see right here, we have the div that displays the name, the text box, and the button. You recognize the curlies, but what you probably don't recognize is the £, the brackets, and the parentheses. So I'm going to go through each one of these one by one. So sort of a new concept in Angular 2 is local variables. And this is something that I was kind of geeking out when I first started using it. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this actually exists. And what you can do here is by you saying £, on this text box, it gives me a handle. So it's now local variable to just the template. It doesn't bleed out into the scope anywhere else. It just lives inside your template. And I can actually bind it to the page. So I say new name.value, and that's the property of that input. So if I change the value, it changes on the page. And where this comes in handy is with event handlers. And that's where we saw the parentheses. So you see parentheses click. And we say click equals change name. And that is a function on my component controller. And from there, I can pass in the event that was clicked on. And then I also can say new name.value. And that passes that back into my component controller method. So in just 2 lines of HTML, I've created a local variable and I've passed its value. It's very declarative. I don't have to say document.get element by ID. I don't have to do anything to find it. It's very easy to look at this and reason that I'm grabbing the value when I click a button. And lastly, with the array bracket syntax is property bindings. Now we're used to binding to attributes in Angular 1. But in Angular 2, this is a bit different. Rather than binding to attributes, we're binding to actual properties of a DOM element. So if you were to write document.getElement by ID for a span, you could say whatever the span handle is, .text content. And I'd tell you whatever the text in is at the time. There's no such thing as a text content attribute. So from here, I'm binding to properties, not attributes. So now when I update this text box, I can say whenever the new name.value changes, I'm going to update it to the text content of the span. So we'll look at this one more time and so we can reason about what's going on. We know that we're displaying the name from the component controller because we have our name property. And then down here we have a text box, which we gave the local variable of new name. When this button is clicked, which we know because of the parentheses, we call the function change name, which is inside of our component controller. And we pass that the new name.value, which our change name does. It expects a new name. And then we just simply say this.name equals new name, and our name gets updated. And one of the really great benefits of using this new syntax is uniformity. Whenever I'm declaring an event handler, I know I just need to use the parentheses. And any type of event can fit in there. So if if we want to do a mouse over, a double click, I can use this front-end developer knowledge I know about, all these DOM events, and I just need to know the syntax for Angular 2. I don't have to worry about knowing about the ng-click directive or the ng-model or ng-double-click. There's no one-to-one directive to event ratio anymore. This works for all events, including custom events on web components. And then we also know that whenever we want to bind to a property, we just use array bracket syntax. So there, like I was saying, there's always the difference between ng-model, ng-click. You had to really know what that directive did to use it. And then now I know what a property is. I know the syntax. I know I'm binding to that syntax right away. There's no just diving into the documentation, seeing like what are the side effects of this. Just by knowing the syntax, it's easy to reason about. And what this also does, it provides us flexibility. So when we create web components, one of the great new things about that is you can create custom events. So I could create a web component that fires out a name change event. But the problem with that is that I now have to create an ng-name change event. And that's what this top thing is doing. It's from Angular 1. So now I got to say ng-name change and write the directive for that. But in Angular 2, I don't have to do that. I know I have a brand new name change event, so I just pass it into the parentheses. I don't create a directive. I don't do anything at all. It's completely supported. So we know how to create components. We can bootstrap them up. And we see the new template syntax. But what happens when things change? How does that actually happen? Well, the great news is that you don't really have to care. It kind of works magically. But if you want to know what's under the hood, and I apologize for this, this doesn't come out too well in the resolution, but this is how Angular 2 change detection works. And this is, in my opinion, one of the coolest things that I've seen while working with it. So an Angular 2 application is just a tree of components. And this component, and by the way, this is taken from Angular core team member Vic Savkin's blog post, which is really awesome. So I recommend doing the read for more information. But in this case, we have an app component at the top. And then an app component has a child, which is a to-dos component, which has a child of a to-do. Now, whenever a change happens, it goes down one way. So it starts at the app component, and it runs change detection, and then it can go down to each one of the child components. And change detection is really smart. So it works at a module level. So each component only has to update its individual updates. And also, if we do more advanced things, such as using immutable data or observables, this component tree can be very smart and say, well, I'm not going to update this because I know it's immutable. So it gives you faster performance. But you could do a really big talk on this, and I know that Vic will be. So there'll be more information about this later. So the change detection runs, but how does change detection know to run? And this is one of the new libraries used in Angular called Zone. And so Zone is kind of like the Professor X of Angular, or Professor X of JavaScript. Whenever an asynchronous event happens, it just lets Angular know, hey, something has happened, run change detection. And then so change detection runs, and everything gets updated. And a good example of this, for those of you who have ever dealt with asynchronous events in Angular, is when you have to use timeout, so $timeout. In this case, this is some Firebase code. And what I'm doing is I'm attaching a callback function whenever something updates in Firebase. And Angular does not know anything about Firebase. So if I want this to be updated in my view, I call $timeout, and I set scope.user to snap that file. So this is what we currently do in Angular 1. And this isn't terribly a performant way of doing it or an easy way to do it. I pretty much spend most of my days answering Stack Overflow questions about this. So what's great about Angular 2 is that we don't have to do this anymore. Change detection in Angular 2 is much smarter. Whenever this callback function fires off, Zone says, hey, by the way, this callback function fired off. Angular says, thanks for letting me know about it. I'm going to run change detection. And then everything just sort of happens. So now when we're writing our code that lives outside of Angular, we don't have to know about digest, apply, timeouts, or anything like that. That just happens. And we can go about writing the code, writing JavaScript that we know how to write without worrying about how Angular works. All right, so that is pretty much the core basic concepts of Angular. So we'll take a look at the code. All right. So well, first I'm going to show you how it works. So this is an Angular 2 to-do app. And like I said, this is pretty washed out on this one. But what I can do is I can say, OK, what do I need to do? I need to give a talk. And this is written in Firebase. So if I refresh the page, give a talk. So it persists. So I can do things like check off the list. And then I can say, OK, clear completed. And that works. So it's all works. And when I wrote the Firebase piece of this, I didn't write a single timeout, a single anything like that. It was just all regular code. And when we actually need to port the Angular Fire library over, it'll actually involve a lot less code than what we need to do to get it to work in Angular 1. So this is the source code. And essentially each part, this to-do app is 3 parts. We have this header where the text box lives. We have the main, which is where we render our to-dos. And then we have this footer, which gives us all these action items down here. So we're going to do a little bit of switching back and forth so it's easy for you guys to see what's going on. So we'll open up the header. And the way this header works is the ID of new to-do is just for styling. And then placeholder and autofocus, just regular attributes. And with new to-do, I've given it the local variable. I say on key up, call my component controller method, enter to-do, with the event given and new to-do. So now I'm going to go into my component controller. And right here we have, where did I have enter to-do? Thank you. See, I need you guys. All right, so what I do in here is I get that event. I can say, hey, which key was pressed? If so, call this.addToDo, which is another method. And then I pass in the new to-do.value, clear out the to-do. And if we see add to-do, all add to-do is calls this.todo service, which is my Angular Fire service, .add, and sends that data out to Firebase. So that's pretty simple. And so we'll go and look at the body now. So look at the main piece. And we have right here, we have the ability to say click, toggle all. So when I say toggle all, I check to see if the checkbox is checked. If it's not, toggle all of them, untoggle them. And then inside here, we have a new little piece that I didn't have any slides on, but it's definitely worth talking about. We have this, bang for each. And this is the replacement syntax for ng-repeat. So now we can say bang for each, local variable to do, and the list of to-dos. Inside of here is what will be repeated, so each list item. And then from in here, you can see actually where we're binding to class. We can get even more specific to that. Rather than just binding to a class, we can bind to a specific class. So class.hidden is equal if the current to-do is editing, the current to-do that's being rendered is the to-do that's also being edited. And this, just like as you've seen in the slides, we can bind to the click, or binding to check, and then we're also binding to double click. So this all is very uniform syntax. And then down here, I actually completed this code. I didn't actually want this to be done. So we'll pretend like that's not there. And now that it was never there, if we wanted to add a click event to clear all the completed ones, we say click. We say that it's clear completed. Now, when we go into our to-do component controller, this method down here at the bottom is clear completed. It just gathers all the to-dos that have been marked as completed, and then it sends it off to the to-do service to clear all of them. And so from there, when I check things off, clear completed, it works. So it's very simple to reason about what's being clicked, what's an event, what's being clicked on, and how I can actually get the values to pass it to these events. All right. So that's what we have for you today. We are going to be able to answer a lot more questions because I'm sure you have a few. There's no documentation yet. And so you can throw that at me. I just said I'm responsible for documentation. I tell you there's no documentation. I actually have something planned that will be out probably within a week or two that will be pretty cool. That will cover a lot of pretty much this information in a interactive tutorial format. There will be, if you want to check out the code for this, that'll be posted. There's a GitHub repo for that. And ng-conf is going to be very much Angular 2 centric. So all of these advanced things, all of the stuff that I wasn't even going to talk to you about today, like routing and dependency injection, that stuff's going to be talked a lot more at ng-conf. So there's a lot more to be excited about. And we'll be on NPM soon. So that'll be cool too. So all right. That's what I got. If you got any questions.
David, why don't you stay up there? Mishko, can you come up? And I will run the microphone around. And yeah, why don't you come up too, Naomi, if you would, please. Questions? Everybody's flabbergasted at the new syntax. I understand. Yes, question here.
What are the functional differences between local variables and ng-model? So is a local variable available from the business logic?
Just give them So the question is, what is the difference between a local variable and like ng-model? So unfortunately, what this demo did not show is there's going to be support for forms. So David cheated a little bit by simply binding to events and getting the data out of the input elements that way. So the forms are the replacement for ng-model. And at the end of the day, really it should be as simple as changing the syntax from ng-model to something else. And there's going to be some semantic changes. But fundamentally, it's going to work very similar. You're not going to see it. The reason for the change is because we want to make sure that we can retain this directed acyclic graph. And we have to make sure that any reverse bindings, in order to get the full circle going, has to execute before the change detection. And so that's kind of the reason we have to move things around. But at the end of the day, what you're going to get is going to very much feel like two-way data binding, even though under the hood we're going to have to do some tricks to make it happen in proper order so it's very predictable. Right, so two-way data binding, that's a kind of a love-hate relationship. So there is this thing in Angular 1x, or if you have two components and they're bound to each other, you can actually set the directionality of it to be two-way data binding. And that actually seems like a good idea at first until you have a large-scale application, and then it turns out that you have no idea what's going on, who's binding to what, who's updating what, and it turns out to be kind of an anti-pattern for large apps. So to make the large apps more predictable and easier to understand and debug and so on, we opted for this idea of directed acyclic graph, which means you cannot have any pointers going in the reverse direction. And turns out all kinds of wonderful things happen if you do that, but it makes certain things not possible, which is mainly two-way data binding. And so what we do, again, we go back to this forms, is that we want to give you a syntax that's going to look like data binding, two-way data binding, but actually it's going to be a very clear state when the reverse direction happens and the forward direction happens.
Over there. I'll go back here and I'll come up front here.
What about like cross-controller communication, like emit and broadcast and stuff like that? I mean, they're not great, but sometimes they're needed.
So how do you do cross-compiler communication? That's a good question. We're also changing that one a little bit. So it turns out there's actually two different kinds of events you can do in cross-compiler, two components communicating. There is the two components that don't actually know about each other. So for example, person A implements a fancy text in calendar widget, and person B wants to go and consume it. In this case, because they don't know about each other, kind of the DOM event model, kind of broadcasting and emitting is kind of the way you want to do this. But we do it on a DOM level so that the component emitting it says, I'm emitting event foo, and then you do parentheses foo in order to listen to it. The other mode of communication is that within a single application, when you have two components that have very tight coupling. So for example, you have tic-tac-toe application, and it has components that is an individual cell. In that case, the better way to do it, instead of doing events, you can certainly do events, but a better way to do it is to simply inject the app into the child and simply call methods on it. And the benefits of that is that while it gives you a tight coupling, presumably the two components are already tightly coupled because they're part of the same app. And you can do things like navigating inside of the IDE. So you just have a function call, and you can right-click through the, you can click through the function call and get to the destination, etc. So we give you these two different modes that you can do, and hopefully that solves your problem.
Up front here.
So going back to your previous comment you were making, so the example David showed, if I recall, he basically had the event and he passed a local variable that went to the function. And presumably the value changed. Doesn't kind of like conflict with what you were stating, because then you have no idea what's changing the value to the local parameter.
So there's the kind of the digest phase, which updates the data binding. But there's also what I don't have a good name for, but I just call the reverse binding, which is what gets the data from the UI and kind of gets it to the application, which then you can do data binding on. So what you see in the parentheses is really the reverse mode data binding. What you see inside of brackets is the forward data binding. That's kind of the distinction. There's a couple of other distinctions in there, but those are fundamentally what's going on.
Back in the back there. I'm coming around. Don't move.
What about scope inheritance? Is it like going to be like class inheritance? Because I see here often when we refer to a template, there's a possibility that the template in turn refers to another widget. I mean, a subdirective equivalent to a subdirective, and how is data going to flow through that chain?
Is this about scoping inheritance or referring to directives?
Scoping inheritance, but I can see like when there are subdirectives, they most likely share the inherit from the parent.
I think
right?
I know. I think I understand your question. So I think what you're asking is that in Angular 1x, scopes inherited from each other. So you have a component, you would automatically get the parents. So in Angular 2, because of the components, you can think of Angular 2 component as a Angular 1x scope that has private state. What is it called? Isolate scope.
Okay. So we can choose to pass whatever information from the parent scope.
Yeah, so you use data binding. So there's two modes you can do. Actually, there's three. You can use you can data bind it, excuse me, through the bracket notation. you can dependency inject it. You can dependency inject the parent controller into the child controller, which is something that was not shown here. And you can actually do the reverse thing where you can actually query your children. So there's kind of 3 modes of which you can get hold of these things, and they actually play to different strengths and weaknesses of depending on the situation you are in. You might want to use one or the other, and by giving you these choices, it actually becomes a lot more expressive in what you're trying to do.
Okay, but then, I mean, when we have templates and you said that the scope of a variable is within that template, say for example, when we declare the a new name and the new name dot value was available throughout the template, so does it mean that it seems like to me when a template is embedded inside another template, so the whole everyone gets to share all the values, right?
So what's different in Angular 2 is that we're built on top of web components, and web components have this thing called a shadow DOM. And even if your browser doesn't have shadow DOM, we're going to pretend as if it did, and we're going to kind of emulate it. So the new terminology, rather than inventing our own terminology of transclusion and isolated scopes and who goes, excuse me, who gets what, we're simply saying, look, there is already a terminology out there. It's called web components, and we just follow that. Now, what the web components gives you is it gives you isolations, like good programming principles. Says if you have a function, it should be isolated from another function, right? And because of these isolations, the variables actually don't flow very far. They only stay within a particular component's view, and they're not visible inside of child views or parent views. So there's actually pretty strong isolation guarantees in there. And it's actually a good thing because it allows you to build large apps and you don't have to worry that you accidentally clubber each other, that you have the same name, or the importing of things. Like it's really properly isolated this time.
Thanks.
Cool. Next question. Yes, back row. I'm getting over there.
Will the templates end up taking advantage of some of the web components and Shadow DOM stuff for styling? So encapsulated CSS instead of having to do ID everywhere to.
The short answer is yes. we'll take advantage of this. So web components, rather Shadow DOM, is available in Chrome and Chrome. Okay. Now, it would be sad if Angular only ran on Chrome. So what we do is we say, okay, well, we think the future is Shadow DOM and web components, and therefore we're going to just take the vocabulary that web components provide. So you're going to have to learn about Shadow DOM, the Light DOM, the reprojection, and all the stuff that web components provide. The nice thing is any framework that's going to be on top of web components will have the same exact vocabulary. And what we're going to do then is we're going to actually run the Angular in one of, I believe, 4 modes. You can either use Shadow DOM, where it's required, and so obviously would only run on Chrome, or we're going to enter emulated mode, where we're going to pretend we have Shadow DOM, so we're going to have the same semantics, but obviously there is no Shadow DOM. Now in that mode, we can actually subdivide in two different sub modes when it comes to styling. We can either properly isolate the the CSS styles by reading the CSS and then prefixing everything with a component name and then writing it back out. And so that's going to give you isolation. But that has all kinds of, for people who have never done web components or shadow roots, it's going to be like, surprise, why does it work this way? Why is the styling not working? And so forth. So we actually have a different mode which doesn't do this. So by default, we're going to pretend we have web components, but we're not going to do styling. Unless you actually opt into it, then it's going to be a couple of learnings to do. These are actually not our learnings. This is just like the standard of web components, right? So if you opt into this and you're willing to do all this extra work that the web components will kind of require of you in order to get proper isolation, we're going to support it.
Right.
So that's going to be nice.
Cool. More questions? Oh, in front here.
So my question is, in Angular 1, we use service a lot. So service kind of a singleton, which is a way share the data in different components. I saw in the example you also use a service. So my question, are they still the same, or is there any difference between 1 and 2?
Yes, so the question is about services. The short answer is yes, it's the same, but it's a little more complicated because in Angular 2, we actually have a hierarchical dependency injector. So in Angular 1, everything is a singleton. In Angular 2, things are singleton within their, with respect to their injector. But because you can have multiple injectors, you can create injectors and destroy them, you can actually control the lifetime of objects. And this is done by component in the annotation. Not only does the component declare what template it wants to use in a selector, it can also configure an injector for itself, for its shadow root, and for its children. And by configuring and then bringing the components, bringing the components on the page to either like ng-if or ng-repeat, or then taking them out by navigator or router, you can actually control the lifetime of the services and things that go with it. So it's the same concepts you're familiar with. We made certain vocabulary better, so you don't have to have a confusion about what's a service and what's a factory and so on. And we actually gave it more power so that you can have these hierarchical things and you can lazy load into your application and unload modules and so on.
I'll just try to refactor what Mishko said. If you don't care about having more power, it's going to be the same with better syntax. If you want more features, the features will be available, but you have to understand how the hierarchical DI works. But if you don't care, don't worry about it.
Thanks, Igor.
Another question. Yeah. Back there, then there.
So you talked a lot about the templates, but I remember at the time there was a design doc about how Angular supports data, like and synchronizing with the server, like maybe replacing the $HTTP services and stuff like that. And now there's also David here with Firebase. Maybe there's like, is it in Angular 2 it will be different for you to write Angular Fire? There will be different stuff about that.
So I'm going to just mention something. I'm going to have both of you guys answer it. I think both Igor has something to say because he's working on the data services, and obviously the Firebase David guy will have something to say. The first thing I want to just say is that because of the zones, many things will just magically work. I cannot express to you just how excited I am about zones. It is the bee's knees.
This is true.
So David got his Firebase thing that was not meant for Angular, just a regular plain old Firebase. And he pulled it into the To-Do app, and it just worked out of the box with not any kind of apply, scope.$apply, or any of that stuff is just all gone. Having said that, you can talk more about the data, maybe.
So
He was asking about XHR, replacement for XHR.
That would be, you would answer that.
So this is one of the things that is... Can you hear me? Okay. So this is one of the things that is not as developed as the templating part yet. We're looking at different solutions for the data layer, including looking at observables that are coming in the S7. I think this is something that could solve many of the hard problems that we're currently having with the current data approaches in Angular or even outside of Angular. And there are some other very interesting things coming, and we're going to talk about that at ng-conf. So stay tuned.
Is it on? Oh, it's on. Well, yeah, for as far as the Angular Fire went, like Mishko said, the easiest part was the fact that like I started writing it and it just worked. There was no, like, when we write it, the hardest part really is focus. I mean, the hardest part is keeping everything synchronized, but as far as Angular goes, is knowing when to apply these things and to do it in a more efficient way. And a lot of that Angular like internal knowledge that we all are constantly refactoring and learning more about kind of just disappeared. And so when I wrote it, I was like realizing I wasn't writing any Angular code at all. It was all just JavaScript, and that was mostly, all that was because of zones, like he said. So it was pretty magical.
Cool. Over here.
I'll just add one more thing to the data layer. The direction where we're going, we definitely don't want to couple Angular with a particular database solution or backend solution. We want to be backend agnostic. But we do want to provide some of the options out of the box, so that if you want something, it will be something supported by the Angular team.
Hi, can you talk more about lazy loading and loading on demand? How it's going to be implemented for complex applications?
Lazy loading. Okay. So you're going to have a dependency injector that is for your application, and the router will navigate to some subview, right? And when you navigate to the subview, the router can create a new child injector, and the child injector requires a set of modules to be configured with. and those can be lazy loaded from just lazily loading script code. That's not difficult in itself. What is difficult is to be able to configure the injector. And because the way components are set up, and because even if you noticed, top level application is just a component, it's just components all the way down, we can just, there's really no difference between saying, oh, I'm loading a new child component, which is lazily, or I'm actually bootstrapping a whole new child application. The two are essentially mentally the equivalent. And so the router is going to be the key to allow us to do lazy loading of both the code and everything else that comes with it.
There are going to be configurations where you say the logic of lazy loading, right?
Yes, so the router, when you configure the router, you will specify what's the URL, what's the component that should get loaded per that URL, and then the component itself will have instructions on to how to configure the injector.
Some example to come. Okay, back here, and then up there, and then back there. Okay, woo, lots of questions.
Hey, I actually have a simpler question. I'm just curious about your reasoning for adding all those weird brackets and all sort of symbols in your DOM. Like you're in the process of simplifying it, might as well make it simpler.
This is simpler.
Like, I mean, I'm just curious behind your reasoning for all those weird.
So the biggest reason is removing ambiguity for both humans and tools. If you look at the Angular1 template, it's very hard to reason about which part of the template is an Angular expression, which part is a literal string, what is a class name, or any kind of value. It's very hard to know this except at runtime. When directive runs or Angular compiler runs, that's when we have the information. And often the information is only available to the directive itself. The compiler often doesn't even know what's a value, what's an expression. So what we are trying to do is make the syntax less ambiguous so that we can statically analyze templates without even knowing what the directive is going to do. This will enable us to do two things. People are going to be able to easily reason about the template. They're going to understand, okay, there's a binding here, and the binding is to this expression, from this expression to this property. Or there's this event handler, and it's like obvious from the syntax. The other thing is tools will also be able to analyze templates without understanding how Angular and each directive in Angular works. So we'll be able to do things like template transformations where we can minify the template. We'll be able to verify the template and tell you, hey, you made a typo in this expression, because we know that the component has only property username and user email, and you typed whatever, gender or something else. And we know that gender doesn't exist. Or you made a typo in user email and you misspelled it. We're going to have that information now available to us, so we can tell you, hey, there's actually a typo, please go fix it. David already mentioned that we're trying to unify this so that we don't need to create new directives for every event that is out there. This is very important for web components. We need generic syntax that just works for web components or any custom events, so that we don't need to be extending the directive library with every event that people will come up with.
I want to actually add something to it. When you say, can we make it simpler? And I kind of jokingly said that we actually did make it simpler. The thing is, when you have something that's different, it obviously kind of feel like, well, it's different. You made it more complicated. But let me give you empirical data that shows you that actually we made it simple. You guys are familiar with ng-click, ng-double-click, ng-mouse move, ng, and all the ng event names. ng-show, ng-hide, ng-sort, ng-disabled, ng-enabled, and there's probably I'm missing somebody. All of those directives I just named, gone. They don't have to. We don't need them in the new syntax. So we are actually simplifying the whole thing. Turns out, for example, ng-show and ng-hide, there is a property called hidden on a DOM element. And if you set it to true, the DOM hides. So all you have to do in the new syntax is just say bracket hidden and bracket equals true. And this isn't some kind of special directive like ng-show that wakes up and does magical things to the compiler. We're just setting a property. It's really as simple as that. All of the event system are gone. all of these strings we had to do with the image source, where we had to say ng source, because if we did source, magical things would happen, and the browser would try to prefetch templates, double curlies. For example, ng enabled and ng disabled are there because enabled and disabled property is special and it has to be removed. Binding the attribute value to false will still make it disabled, because the disabled actually physically have to get removed. So all of these are examples which simply disappear in the new binding syntax, because when you say bracket disabled, you're actually writing to the property, not the attribute. And so a lot of things actually does get simplified. So I just want to kind of ask for your patience and kind of realize that just because it's different, it doesn't make it more complicated. We really, really try to go back to the very basics of it and rethink, like, why are we doing all these things? And it will be different. I totally understand that. But there are good fundamental reasons why we did all these changes, and they will be giving you benefits long term.
Thanks.
And believe it or not, nobody mentioned it. It's actually all valid HTML, even the bang sign in front of the for each somehow. Okay, another question here.
Okay, this one is a bit specific, but what happens if you have a component and let's say you create another class that inherits from that, so extends that component, and then use another component annotation on that?
The annotations themselves do not inherit. So if you subclass a component and you don't give it annotation, it's as if you don't know about it. So you actually have to give it a brand new annotation. It's actually, if you start playing with it, it actually is the proper behavior. Now there's more to it than that. Just because you annotate something, it doesn't mean it's enabled. So in Angular 1x, once you register directive, that directive is available everywhere. And it makes makes code reuse difficult, because if I register a template directive, I'm sorry, a table directive, it's very likely, because table is such a common word, that somebody else will create a different directive that has the same name, and they'll collide and there'll be problems. With Angular2x, you import the individual directives just for your template. And so different components can have a different set of directives that are imported. And as a result, they can have the same names and it will not collide, and which will further aid reusability.
Cool. Was there one over here? Yeah, there you go.
So in Angular.1, whatever, we had the config and the run phases. So what's happening with the config and providers?
So the config phase is gone. The dependency injection system has a vocabulary for, it's kind of closer to juice, if you're familiar with that, where you say bind something to either a value or to a factory, or we kind of specified instructions on how to make one of these things.
Objects for configuration.
You have to mumble louder.
So one of the reasons why you needed the provider was to customize how an object is instantiated. And what we do now, instead of having this special phase, we have config objects that are injected into the constructor of each service or each object that is being instantiated by DI. And using that config object, you can achieve the same thing that you did with the provider in the past.
Okay, I know I have more questions over here. Back there. Is there, okay, and then,
What is the future of Angular1.x? I'm mainly asking because if we have a large project, and how soon we should be targeting to upgrade, or will there be a possibility of project can partially upgrade it to 2.0 and partially can we use 1.3 or 1.4? So that way we don't have to migrate entire project, but we can go phase by phase.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things we're actually discussing. How could we make it possible to run Angular2 application in an Angular2 application? And in addition to that, also, how could we run Angular2 application inside of Angular1 application, or run Angular1 application, Angular2 application side by side in the same VM? We don't have all the answers yet. It's something that is totally on our mind, and I think we'll definitely need it for any kind of like large scale migration of big applications. So we are working on that. Please don't upgrade to Angular 2 until it's ready. It's not ready yet. We are showing you this stuff just to keep you in the loop as to what's going on and get your feedback, because we still can change things, and sometimes we just miss stuff or use cases, and it's good to have discussion about stuff that is in progress. So we are definitely committed to 1x. 1.4 is launching around the ng-conf timeframe. We are already planning 1.5. So 1x is nowhere to be dead, even though the code base is aging, as David said. That's just a fact. Like Angular 2, the work we're doing for Angular 2 is because we know that at one point in the future, Angular 1 is going to be obsolete, and we want to be ready for that. So we're committed to supporting 1x. We're going to talk more about the migration story and the support story at ng-conf.
Good.
Does the story include transpali from 1 to 2? We'll talk about the ng-conf. We'll see. We don't like, as I said, Angular 2 is not finished yet, so we don't really know what the options are. Some kind of tooling that would help the migration is a possibility, but we don't know yet.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you achieved those performance numbers that David was showing up there? Those are pretty impressive.
I wish
no,
it was
I
that
thought
simple.
Brad
I
was
wish
in
it was that
marketing and you
simple.
guys were in engineering. Oh, never mind.
So a lot of that is actually, believe it or not, documented. So I'm trying to like do a brain dump of all this stuff. And somewhere in the Angular repo, there is a folder called docs, and it talks about how views work. One of the things we do in Angular 2 is we're trying to remove the need for you to ever get a hold of the DOM element. So a link function is kind of a common place where you get a hold of the DOM element and you do all kinds of magical things inside of there, right? So we remove that, and because we remove that, we can really reason about a template statically. So one of the things we can do is we can reuse the views. In the Angular 1x, we can't do it because once we give the element to a directive, we have no idea what you're going to do with it. You might destroy it, you might remove it, you might rearrange it, and therefore we can no longer reuse it. It's as far as we're concerned, it's been mutilated and it's no good for us. Maybe a strong word. So in Angular 1x, because we don't actually 2x, because we don't actually give you the element, we know exactly what we have done to the DOM structure, and we know how to undo it. And it turns out that this allows view caching, and that's a huge performance improvement. The other place is in Angular 1x, you can kind of, at any point, just say scope.watch and start watching anything you want. We made this all declarative so that we can pre-allocate all of the data structures ahead of time and figure out, okay, when somebody instantiates this particular component, these are all the watches that they're going to have. And what we do is we lay out a prototypical component. We lay out all of its supporting data structures, its injectors, like everything you can possibly imagine. We lay it all out. And then when you say, I need one of those, it's super easy for us to just make a copy. I literally just go over property by property and we just copy it over, and it's very efficient. And those are the two big kind of tricks for us up our sleeves that give us this performance boost. But in order to get that, we need to be able to reason about the template at kind of a compile time. Like the compiler needs to know where all the expressions are, where are all the variables, where are all the subtemplates. And this is the reason why, part of the reason why the syntax had to change, so that we could communicate this to the compiler. Also, it turns out it's beneficial to the developer because you can reason about it. And it's the same set of things that's also beneficial to your tools. So like your IDE could easily color code things and give you hints about what is and isn't valid, where you mistyped something. So this is a kind of an all-around benefit that you can get by kind of rearranging when in a lifetime of an application you're doing things.
Questions over here.
There is one more optimization that is actually quite hard to notice until you look under the hood. In Angular 1, one of the performance optimizations is the compile phase. If you're building directive, you have access to compile phase. And when compile phase is invoked is when you're using a repeater. Usually when you have a element or a component inside of a repeater, we'll call the compile function only once for each repeater. what Mishko talked about, these kind of like static optimizations that we're doing, they happen once per component in the application. So even if you have like two repeaters right now side by side, they're using the same component, we call the compile phase or compile function once for each repeater. With all of these optimizations, we can do just once for application. Even if you like destroy the view and recreate it, we don't need to rerun it again. So this is where a lot of the performance comes also.
Was there a question over here somewhere? There? Yeah.
This is sort of answered already, but we're talking about Angular 1 applications that need to be migrated at some point. But if I'm planning to start a new project today, is there something you would recommend? Because we're kind of lost between, should we start with Angular 1 and then think about migrating to Angular 2? Because Angular 2 is not yet ready. Is there any implementation techniques you would recommend that we can prepare ourselves to migrate to Angular 2 when it's ready?
When you're starting a new project today, Angular 1x is what you're going to start with. If you just want to play with Angular 2, kind of see where it's heading, whatever, for playing purposes, by all means, you can try the To-Do app. But understand that everything's in flux still. Like, we could decide tomorrow that bang for each is a bad idea and it's going to be something else, and tough luck.
By the way, that would be based on your input, not just arbitrary whim. That's why we're doing these events.
It would be based on somebody basically coming to us and telling us, oh, by the way, this is the kind of problems that it creates. And then we would have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we didn't think about that, so let's rethink this kind of a thing. Migration.
So when it comes to particular techniques, one thing that is probably that is going to get you the furthest is just think of your application as components. This was not as important in Angular 1, where we had controllers and templates and the router would combine them together. In Angular 2, everything is a component, and the router just swaps around components, instantiates components. This is like one of the things that you can do today in Angular 1 to make the architecture closer to Angular 2. The other thing you can start doing is start using S6. There are many transpilers out there. We like Tracer, but you can use whatever you want. There's 625 and others. I think you'll find ES6 very pleasant to use and it will make you more productive. So why not start there? Other suggestions? I don't know. We're gonna talk more about this stuff at the ng-conf. We're gonna make a list of recommendations. I haven't really thought much about this.
I would just say stick to good old practices. Like, don't write messy code. That makes it easy to refactor.
Write your tests.
Write your tests. Yes.
Okay, back here.
When you guys introduced track by into ng-repeat, I noticed that it got a lot smarter, obviously, about knowing when to repaint what, but ng-repeat is almost always the bottleneck in terms of performance in the DOM, in my opinion. Have you guys noticed that by implementing zones that you've gotten better performance? It's a lot smarter about knowing when to repaint things. And can we expect to be able to draw potentially hundreds or thousands of things on the screen using ng-repeat?
So the ng-repeat, the rendering is not the bottleneck. What it is detecting the changes, right? And well, depends how you look at it, right? You want to?
Yeah. So I think your question is slightly unclear because you are assuming that zones is some kind of replacement for track by in Angular 1. Is that not the case, or can you clarify your question?
I assume, yeah, by identifying what has changed, you guys are able to accurately determine what you need to redraw using ng-repeat. And via zones, you have more fine-tuned control of determining what's changed. So if you can identify which element, what single element has changed, then you could.
Right. So zones actually don't tell us what changed. Zones only tell us that something changed. It's kind of a general purpose trigger to tell us about events that are happening in the browser. It's still up to us to figure out what changed. And this is where new change detection comes into play, where we can scan a large amount of objects and figure out what changed. And David mentioned some of the strategies we are using where we can do kind of a tree shaking and just looking on only in certain parts of the graph to determine what changed. But I think if you're talking about ng-repeat, specifically in Angular 1x, I would bet that the performance problems are coming from the DOM render, from like creation of DOM, appending DOM to the document, and then having the browser render it. And those issues have been addressed by all these, by the view caching and all these smart things we are doing with the compiler. So we are addressing that.
More question here, yeah.
There was at one time discussion of a long form versus a short form syntax. So instead of the square brackets and the curved braces or whatever, that you would also have a longer form. So if people aren't really into looking at all of the syntaxy, like looking things, that there would be an alternative. Are you still thinking about that?
It's in there already.
That part actually has a doc somebody could read.
I believe so. Yeah, that's actually described in the templating doc. Yes, go find the template.md something or other.
Mishko wrote it. He forgot.
It's horrible. It's just a brain dump, so it's not like well formatted or anything.
More questions back here. Okay.
Yeah, can you talk something about like AngularJS 2.x being mobile first, because that's what I had read a couple of months back, and about testing, and finally, like when can we get our hands onto the final version of 2.x?
I'll take that last question, but go ahead, Mishko.
Mobile, there's a couple things about mobile. First of all, you want to not drain the battery, so you want to be the most efficient possible, both in terms of CPU usage and memory usage, so that you don't force the app to like swap auto memory or something like that. And the other part to mobile story is to have gestures. So let's take each one separately. So for speed, we have this, what we call ultra fast change detection, which I guess wasn't covered in here, was it? No, okay. So it turns out the way the change detection does, when we originally wrote it, I kind of didn't know much about how VMs worked. But turns out we left a whole bunch of what's known as polymorphic calls inside of it.
Megamorphic.
Oh, sorry, megamorphic, thank you. And these megamorphic calls are the worst thing you can do to a VM, and the VM like really does not like them. So we refactored, rebuilt the change detection, we scratched our heads, and we got this new thing which leaves behind nothing but monomorphic calls, sites. And those are awesome because the VM knows how to inline them. And so they make them go really, really, really fast, and fast on mobile means don't kill the battery while you're doing change detection. So that's step one. Step two is we can actually, if a component is well behaved and it makes certain guarantees to us, it's a little extra work on your part, but if you do those guarantees to us, then we can actually skip the change detection altogether for that particular component. So we can kind of do branch pruning. The amount of stuff we have to change detect gets shorter, saves the battery more. And the next part is memory. And so the change detection, because of the way we do it, we actually are also not only efficient in CPU space, but also in memory space. And so the change detection for 2.x is a lot more efficient in that department as well. And finally, the event system, when you do parentheses and you put an event name, it turns out that actually doesn't go directly to the element for the add event listener. Instead, it goes to a set of plugins that can all vote whether or not they know how to intercept a particular event. And the last one in the list is just go into DOM. The one in front of that is something, for now, we're just using Hammer.js. And so when you can say parentheses, left swipe, or you can say parentheses pinch or something like that. And it just understands, oh, I know that DOM doesn't know how to do it, but I know because there's Hammer.js, it knows how to handle that and then properly set the event. So those are the areas where we make it nice for mobile.
Lazy code loading. There's more stuff. Lazy code loading, which you need for mobile. We support that. But also components, and this is what Angular Material is about. So we actually, unlike with Angular, when Angular 1, we kind of started with this late in the lifecycle of the framework. but we want to provide a set of components out of the box so that you can just use those components to build applications. And these components are mobile friendly. They're mobile first. The next thing is offline. So with the data layer that I mentioned, we are looking into offline first as one of the, like making it smooth and just easy for people to do that. And we're looking, the new router is mobile friendly, and we're looking at some other stuff that would help navigation on mobile. So
Wait, he also asked about testing.
testing.
I don't know why that was glommed in there, but we all love testing,
We
so
love
please.
testing. We're gonna just keep on doing testing. We're adding more stuff at ng-conf. We're gonna talk about accessibility testing. David didn't mention, but the graphs actually come from the performance numbers and graphs come from a new tool that we built for Angular that we called Bench Press. That we're also gonna make something that is available to you that you can use for performance testing in your application. So not only are we building it for Angular, but also any Angular application, or even non-Angular application, because it's not tied to Angular, can use the same tool for performance testing. So we love testing. We're gonna do more testing, and we're exploring new areas to do testing in.
So quick question, will there ever be an Angular native? Which compiles down to native?
Maybe.
Anything is possible.
Do you want to come do it with us? So, Mishko, talk a little bit about the structure and why this might be possible. Where really it's not in 1.x, but it could be possible in 2.
How deep should I go?
You got 3 minutes.
Okay, so one of the things I said earlier is that we in Angular2 we work really hard to make sure you don't have to actually ever get a hold of the DOM. And so your whole application can be written without DOM, and because it can be written without DOM, you can run it essentially anywhere, like maybe a web worker. Well, we're not sure what that exactly means. We're kind of toying with this idea. But if you have a web worker, the other thing we have is that all the DOM updates happen through, instead of dealing with DOM, which is kind of very low level, we have this other thing called a view. And view is kind of the structural or logical way of thinking about the app. Like views can be added or removed and so on. And because it's view, it creates a very nice interface for serialization. So if your application runs in the web worker, it becomes really easy to serialize all the deltas for it across the wire and then send it over to the UI thread, which then can update all the operations. But once you have that, you kind of squint and you go like, well, wait a minute, why does it have to be a UI thread on a browser? It could really be just about anything that gets these updates, including maybe native. That's as far as we got. But if you have some ideas, we're kind of making sure we're kind of designing this stuff to keep the doors open.
So no plans. I know Facebook has an announcement of this native thing. We would love to partner with them. You know, we should go say hi to them. That might be a thing. Okay, over here.
In Angular 2.0, will it be possible to append components to other components at runtime?
Yes.
Not from the start?
Yes. So getting hold of other components is one of the things that you're going to love in Angular 2.0. The dependency injection system in Angular 2.0 is amazing. I don't know what else I can tell you guys. No, it says how to get components, get a hold of each other, no? Oh, append new components at runtime. I heard the question I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So that would be through lazy loading. So that's how you can do it. The other question was a lot more interesting.
Will it be something like you are using now $compile?
All the dollar signs are gone, but yes, there's a compile service. It's something like that, yes. I'm not sure. It's not actually clear to me how.
Like creating dynamic views.
I know, but a lot of things are kind of moved around, and like you have to. It gets complicated. Yes, but the short answer is there definitely will be something like that, and we need it for lazy loading of views. So this is going to happen. the details are not kind of like laid out figured out just yet, but it's a requirement. It's a hard requirement. This one's not going to miss. We're not going to miss that one.
Just to know that. Thank you.
Do you have any plans for server-side rendering, especially because of external crawling?
Maybe.
That'd
So
be nice.
just like we mentioned, the native, the architecture we have allows us to do this kind of stuff. One thing that we already want to do is do template precompilation, where we will just just like you minified your JavaScript, we'll be able to precompile template and basically work that is usually done by the compiler on the client side during the startup of the application would be done during the build step of the application. And while we at that, we can also extract all the metadata we need to actually do server-side interpolation, which would allow us to create a system where you can pre-render stuff on the server. It's not something we are actively working on right now, but the architecture we are building takes this into account and leaves it as a possibility.
Thanks.
Hello. So the one question that I have also to the lazy loading is more about, maybe I remember wrong, but someone during NG Europe said that the lazy loading will be also available in 1.x. Maybe I remember wrong. The question is,
I don't remember what exactly was said at NG Europe. I remember many things from NG Europe. I don't remember this particular one, so I don't know how it was formulated. But what I can tell you is that the lazy loading in 1x is much more complicated because of we don't have a hierarchical DI, and the reason why, like this was kind of hard to explain, but the reason why we don't want to do lazy loading in 1x is not because it's impossible. It just would make the application unstable. And I think it would be very easy to introduce bugs that would be very hard to debug, and then in your production, the application would just not work in certain scenarios. And this is what we want to avoid. We discussed how we could, and hierarchical injector solves this problem. So we don't have that problem with Angular2, and we can just do lazy loading without any issues. In Angular 1x, however, we're thinking of some workarounds that would allow us to provide you these guarantees and also do lazy loading. The new router that we're backporting from 2.0 to 1x makes it possible to do lazy loading. There's still some pieces that need to be done in the core. I don't think we'll have enough time to do it in 1.4, but it's on the table for 1.5.
Nice. Thank you.
More questions? Or if we're out, that's great. That's a lot of questions. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful to have you. Come join us on one of the live viewing streams at ng-conf, unless you're coming in person, which is awesome too, where you'll hear more about material design, the new router, internationalization, accessibility, more on testing, all kinds of other good stuff. We'll hope to see you there. Thanks. Bye.